Hello. Have you ever collected frog spawn from a pond? I'm sure some of you have, but even if you haven't, I'm sure you know that frog spawn turns into little tadpoles, and little tadpoles turn into little frogs. Well, today's story is about Mr. Pollock and his grandchildren, but it's really about Mr. Pollock's pond. Are you ready? In Mr. Pollock's garden pond were 6 fat goldfish. Mr. Pollock's grandchildren liked to watch the fish. They could see them when they swam near the surface of the pond, but they were difficult to spot when they dived deeper because it was a muddy pond and the water was dark and murky. In the summer, Mr. Pollock's pond was always full of lively little black tadpoles and baby frogs. Mr. Pollock's grandchildren used to try and catch them, but the tadpoles wriggled into the murky mud and hid. All the frogs and tadpoles disappeared in the winter. Only the 6 fat goldfish swam gloomily around in the dark water. "It's time I cleaned that pond out," said Mr. Pollock. He thought how nice it would be to see the goldfish swimming in clear water. So, one fine winter's day, Mr. Pollock put on his old gardening clothes and Wellington boots and came out to clean his pond. He scooped the water out with an old plastic bucket and he emptied it down the nearest drain. He was very careful not to empty the goldfish down the drain too. Every time he caught one in the bucket, he gently lifted it out and popped it into a big plastic bowl full of clean water. Soon, all 6 goldfish were safely swimming in the bowl. It was the first time they'd seen one another so clearly for years. By the time Mr. Pollock had emptied the 45th bucketful of muddy water down the drain, all that was left in the pond was some thick, oozy mud at the bottom. By this time, Mr. Pollock's grandchildren had arrived to help him. The children noticed some odd lumps and bumps in the mud at the bottom of the pond. "Look, Grandad!" they cried. "It's frogs! The mud is full of sleeping frogs!" Mr. Pollock was astonished to find all these sleeping frogs at the bottom of his pond. "Oh, they must hibernate here during the winter," he said. Now, Mr. Pollock had a problem. What was he to do with the frogs? They needed the mud to hibernate in, but he wanted to clean it out. "Oh, can't we take them to the dew pond in the field at the bottom of the hill?" said the children. "The dew pond is nice and muddy, and they would be safe there." Mr. Pollock thought that was an excellent idea. He scooped the mud and all the hibernating frogs into his big wheelbarrow and wheeled it down the hill to the dew pond. The children helped him to tip the frogs into the dew pond. "Oh, they should be all right there," said Mr. Pollock. Now, Mr. Pollock's own pond was ready to be washed out and filled with clean water. He fixed his garden hose so that when the water was turned on, it sprayed into the pond like a fountain. The children helped. They got rather wet, but they enjoyed themselves. It took 1 hour and 52 minutes to fill the pond right up to the very edges. Then Mr. Pollock gently put the goldfish back into the pond. They looked beautiful, darting and gliding about in the clear, sparkling water. Soon the real cold of winter came. Sometimes the pond iced over. Mr. Pollock's grandchildren seldom came to look at the fish now. But when the warm spring came again and chased away the last of the frosty winter, the children came back to poke about in Mr. Pollock's pond once more. The water wasn't quite so clear now, but the goldfish looked well and happy. "Will there be any tadpoles this year?" the children asked their grandfather. "Oh, I'm afraid not," said Mr. Pollock rather sadly. "All the frog spawn will be in the dew pond this year." Mr. Pollock's pond would be rather dull without the usual tadpoles and baby frogs. "Perhaps we could get a bit of frog spawn from the dew pond," said the children. Mr. Pollock thought this was a splendid idea. He gave the children an empty jam jar, and they set off down the hill to the dew pond. They were only halfway down the hill when they stopped. Hopping and flopping up the hill towards them came a little crowd of frogs. The children laughed so much that Mr. Pollock came to see what was happening. "Oh, it's the frogs we took to the dew pond," he said. "They have woken up and now they're coming back to their own pond." Mr. Pollock was right. The frogs hopped up the hill, through Mr. Pollock's gate, flopped across his garden and plopped back into their good old pond. Everyone was glad to see them, even the goldfish. "Oh, it's going to be a good year for tadpoles after all," said Mr. Pollock. "I think those frogs were very clever to find their way back to Mr. Pollock's pond. Well, perhaps they were feeling a bit lonely and wanted to be back with their old friends, the goldfish." Well, that's all there's time for today, but I hope to see you again soon. And don't forget to have a nice day at school. Goodbye for now.